You probably heard that, there is this thing HDR, and it's certainly going to stay here with us. I don't think it's going to go. And what's very interesting as well is, like, when I started seeing the HDR, it was also time where, in my quest to kind of figure out how to get better images, I started moving away from the grading theater and started moving more and more onto set and understanding what is it that we can do with the cameras on set in order to get the best possible image quality on set. I certainly understand that the principle of the best image quality is to do so in the lens, in the camera, before actually comes to the post. If we start with a good quality, at the beginning, then it's very easy for us in the post to kind of finesse image and come up to most amazing looking stuff. So I kind of started understanding how the cinematographers work, and one person that helped me immensely on that is Vanya. He's actually somebody that has greatly contributed to all the software development and color science development that I was doing, simply because he was able to really explain to me what he does and how he works and the problems that he's experiencing. So I just want to kind of give a little introduction, it was, I think, it was about last year, I think maybe a little bit more than a year ago, that Vanya rang me and he said, Dado, I've been asked to do Netflix's first HDR show, and the fact that it's first just means that I've never done it and nobody's ever done it, and is there anything that you could do to help us with it? Then it was just recently actually that Vanya called me and he said, oh, I'm doing another show, and actually I'm shooting that on Varicam, and I worked with Theo Van de Sande on this camera in London just maybe a few months before, and I was really happy to see that. When I went to visit Vanya on set, what I saw was something that I just couldn't believe, the way. So do you want to just tell us a little bit, how you were working the lighting and how you were shooting with this camera?
I just wrapped the new HBO series called The Deuce a couple of weeks ago. The Deuce was created by David Simon, whose work you might know. He created the show The Wire, which is a classic TV series. And I knew his work, and I knew his dedication to authenticity. And the story of The Deuce takes place in the 1970s, early 1970s, in Midtown Manhattan. And I wanted to come up with a style, shooting style, that would feel as real as possible. Because I knew the world of The Deuce will be these characters. It's about the prostitution and rise of porn industry in the 70s in New York. So I knew that these characters live at night on the streets. And most of their world is lit by neon and all these practical sources that were built into the streets. And around that time, I heard about Varicam 35 and the dual native sensitivity sensor that sends 5,000 ISO has 5,000 ISO sensitivity, which I found hard to believe at the time. So I wanted to test it and see if that would be the camera that would help me support this style. And after initial tests, I was really amazed how well the camera performed in low light levels. And it just allowed me to go into territories that I haven't been able to go to before. And I took the test footage to the post house, and I developed a lot with the colorist. We wanted to simulate the film stock, Fuji stock from the 70s. And once we came up with a lot and processed the footage, I was really amazed how consistent the camera performs from 800 ISO to, I realized I can push it all the way to 3200 without any noticeable loss of quality, any real grain, without any grain reduction. That's how it started. I just knew that I'll be able to work with less light. It also presents new challenges like controlling the highlights and things like that. One problem that cinematographers encounter when working in that way is protecting the highlights. Because to expose for the shadows and not lose the highlights has always been a struggle. That was one of the areas that I was really impressed with the Vericam, how well it preserves the highlights. I would, be able to walk into a location I've never seen before, look at all available practical sources, and decide which ones I like, which ones I didn't like, and without any concern about whether I'll get enough exposure from the practical light source, I would pick the light source and build all the other lighting around it. For example, most obvious example is like a tiny little candle on a table in a restaurant, in a really dark restaurant, or some industrial light in the background in a dark alley somewhere. And it really changed my whole approach. Typically we use big lights on condors for night exteriors, just to have one base light level for a couple of blocks, city blocks. And I needed to start with what I knew. So I had all this equipment that I would normally use. And little by little, I just started cutting equipment. But once you have that much flexibility, you can light, for example, you light the scene for 800 ISO, the way you would light with any other camera. And then somewhere in the middle of the scene, there's a two-shot, and you decide that you need more depth of field. And you just put the camera at the 3200 ISO, and you get extra depth of field. So you can improvise. So it really gives you the control over depth of field that we didn't have before. Things like using filters inside, like you go into a dark bar and all of a sudden you decide, maybe it would be interesting to put the polarizing filter on, which normally you couldn't afford before because it takes 2 stops out of your light levels. But now you can, like in the middle of a night scene, you can work with the polarizing filters, things like that. So
what I've seen actually was like, you had a scene where you kind of had only one KinoFlow for the whole scene, actually.
Right.
And like that. So there was only one LED light for the whole scene, and you were controlling the level of practical lights actually to get the atmosphere in.
Right.
So
well, that was the thing. Gradually, I started switching to LEDs because I didn't need a lot of light, and I wanted to have as much flexibility as possible. The most exciting thing about working with Vericam is the flexibility that it gives you with the ISO settings. And once you experience that freedom, it's really hard to go back. And Vericam is the only camera on the market today that is able to offer such freedom. It was a process getting accustomed to this way of working, but I think we came up with a unique look that at this time was only possible to create with the technology that Vericam has.
I think also, Vanya, what would be interesting is maybe if we talk a little bit about, what I call color managed approach that you have, know. So, tell us a little bit about it, like, how, you effectively always have a look that you want on set, on the monitor, on your reference monitor, exactly the way you want it. So you are not like, using just any like a conversion Rec 709 or whatever. You work always to get that image and that look that you want on the monitor, isn't it?
Yes, well, I believe, I came from shooting on film. I started, I went to a film academy in Zagreb, and we had, at the time, we were working with the reversal 16mm Agfa stock. So, you had to learn how to be really precise with exposure, because a 1/3 off or half stop off mistake that takes half a stop off is really something you can see, and you can ruin the scene by making a really small mistake. So I trained myself to be really on target with how I exposed the footage, and once we started working in digital with painting on the fly and changing the contrast, at the DIT station, I didn't feel comfortable with that, because after a couple of shots into the scene, I didn't know I couldn't trace back my steps. So I kind of got lost in my process. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. So I felt like I was constantly fixing something. I think you have to, as you said, I think you have to preserve the original ideas. So you have to create as much of the look in front of the camera, while actors are there, while director is there, while everybody's there, and then use that as a base that you bring into the post, and then build upon it and make it better rather than fix it.
That's right. Yeah.
So I decided that I'm going to use a digital camera the way I was using film camera. I decide what the stock is, which is my LUT, and then we build the stock with a collaborator, and then just stick to that and do everything else in lighting.
Yeah. And that's what we call the show LUT. So we basically build a LUT, a show LUT, that sticks through the whole, TV series pretty much,
Right.
And then maybe just do like a tweaks on the CDL level from shot to shot. And then HDR comes along. And I think for HDR, that approach of working becomes even more important, because the image can go in absolutely, crazy ways. What you can in HDR, suddenly you have this big color space, big amount of color, big amount of contrast. And, you really have to understand what you're going to do with that image. And then one thing that that we actually learned, and with the experience we had, was the idea: how are we going to create continuous image or continuous look between an SDR and an HDR? Or actually, what worked better was the other way around: how to make a good HDR and make a fantastic looking SDR out of it.
Well, that's the position we are in now. We more and more of the high profile TV series. TV shows are switching to HDR, but the audience are not. 90% of audience are not going to see the project in HDR for another year or two, maybe. So you have to make sure that what you're shooting will work for both formats, and so that's something we did on Marco Polo, and I kind of took it for granted. I thought it was yeah,
but it was a lot of mathematics for us to make that happen then. But what's happened since is that I went and I developed the Color Lab software, and then that was one of the main things that I really wanted to create in the software, is to make it very easy for you to be able to kind of just be able to create a look in HDR and know how it's going to translate, and be able to just click and switch between the two. Unfortunately, there was nothing available on the market that would do exactly the job for us as way we wanted to do it. So we had to choose the route of developing our own software for it. It's not the easiest route, but we've managed to find a partner in France that is developing software called Color Lab. And that is our little application that we are using to design the look, and then also to create a metadata that is compatible with every manufacturer on the market, so that we can actually successfully move throughout the process and finish it off. That software was only limited to us in our company, but now we're making a worldwide release. Well, it works incredibly well with VariCam, because you see, the VariCam can use our color decisions, color science wirelessly, so we actually don't need any external hardware, and VariCam actually creates all that metadata for us in the camera. It's the only camera that does so. So we were actually so happy once we kind of got VariCam in our hands, to realize that it's doing everything that we wanted it to do already, without us having to make any additional effort with any hardware or anything else. So yeah, it's actually the easiest workflow of all.
I know from now on, any project I do, I will in the prep make sure, hopefully using your software, make sure that even if the company is not asking for the project to be delivered in HDR, I'm going to check that it looks good in both systems, because I think it's going to become a standard. Yeah. Really, really quickly.
And I also think what's very important is creating a good image. It's better if you create HDR first. Because when you create a HDR image first, first of all, you see much more, you have more color, and you're able to get, to really dig deep into that matter and get a really an amazing look. And then when you translate that to SDR, in a proper way, with a proper scaling and maths like this, and actually works really well, then you kind of don't worry whether your SDR image is going to look great or not. I think the process that some people are doing at the moment, where they say, "Oh, we're great in SDR and we're going to do HDR pass," it's a wrong way of doing it.
Right.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think even if your show is not necessarily going to be like a HDR, like HBO said, I remember I was in the conversation. They said, "No, we will never do it." And it took them 3 episodes to realize, actually, we have to go that way.